So good morning, everybody. All right, so speaking in tongues and how to accurately portray the different cultures for an international audience. So I heard Australia. Any other countries represented here today? Finland. Say again? United States. Perfect. And Finland and United States. All right. I will count for Germany then. I'm from Germany. So, and that leads into why this talk. So I was a gamer in Germany, and we have localized versions in Germany. So you get a German version. You play the game, and you realize sometimes they get it wrong in games. Yeah, all your base belong to us. And, so they get it wrong in German too. And you get annoyed and you ask yourself, like, it's not that hard. You know, I speak German fluently. How can it be hard? Why, like, do they just not care what's going on? Then I worked in localization QA for a while, for almost 4 years. And I tested German versions of the game. So playing the German version, figuring out what's not quite right. And again, your job now is to tell the developers, yeah, you got that wrong for linguistic reasons, so language-wise it's just wrong, or for cultural reasons, like that wouldn't resonate with German gamers. You might want to change that. Yeah, so I had all these thoughts of how German localization should be and how easy it would be to get that. And then I got to be a producer, and now I'm kind of in charge of getting it right and figuring out what's so hard about it and why it isn't always possible to get it quite right. So that's where the motivation to actually do this talk comes from. So what is the challenge? For Civilization series specifically, we've always portrayed very different cultures worldwide, and that's part of what Civ is. It's one of the cores of the Civilization series, having these different characters and these different cultures portrayed. It's really important to that game. The immersion for those audiences really depends on getting that right. If I'm a German gamer and I see Bismarck and he's behaving really weird or speaks with a weird accent, I'm not going to buy into him. So that's really important. And now our audience is getting more international. And yeah, so we have experts in our audience now for all the languages we portray and all the cultures we portray. So people are going to point out what we're doing wrong. Yeah, so how hard can it be? Oh, it really depends. The first step, there's different steps to this, and the difficulty is different for the different steps for different cultures. So first step is finding translators and actors who actually speak that language. The second step is selecting the right dialect, voice, and dialogue so that players from those cultures that we're portraying buy into these characters. So finding translators and actors. This can be quite a challenge. As you can probably imagine, if you look at Civ 5, and you just look at some of the Civs we had in Civ 5. Now, on the left, we have Bismarck in Germany, Wu Zetian, China. We have Brazil, Catherine, Sejong, Korea. Then on the other hand, we have Nebuchadnezzar. We have Montezuma, Genghis Khan, Pachacuti, and Boudica. You can probably tell which side finding actors for and translators for is harder. It's pretty obvious in this case. Yeah, the Middle American cultures were really hard to find actors for. Some of these things I only know from stories I got told. So for example, Montezuma, it's just really, really difficult to find somebody to translate into Aztec, and then finding somebody who actually speaks it. And then, of course, you don't only want to have somebody who speaks that language, you also need that person to fit the character your artists have created. This somewhat aggressive guy it needs to fit. It needs to fit the age. It needs to fit the character. It needs to be a good actor, ideally. You want to portray all the emotions with his voice. So that can be really tough. Boudica, for example, also not quite easy. We ended up doing Welsh as the language. It's the closest we have as a living language to that dialect that was actually spoken by Boudica. But finding somebody who actually speaks that exact language she spoke just turned out not quite possible. So we have to find something that's close enough so that as a player you can buy into this. Then on the other hand, easy, of course, we have a lot of German speakers in the world right now. We have a lot of Chinese speakers. There again, getting the right dialect might be harder, but Brazil, quite a lot of Portuguese speakers in the world. So those are just easy because it's a living language. Most of these leaders that are easier to find talent for come from countries where living language is still spoken or are more recent than the other ones. Now to the other part. How hard can it be to not break immersion for lots of players? Now we have the same list down there, and it turns out it's actually exact opposite. Suddenly, the languages that everybody speaks are really hard to get right because you have all these experts in the audience. You know, every German kind of knows if Bismarck is just speaking a weird Swiss accent, and that just wouldn't fit, right? So same for Chinese or Russian. The leaders that where we have a lot of population actually speaking that country, they are kind of by definition experts at that language. They will notice if you get it wrong, and they will point it out. And yeah, easy on the other hand, it's really hard. We haven't had anybody come up to us and say, you know, that dialect Montezuma speaks is really, you didn't get that quite right. He lived like in a more eastern region of that language, that linguistic area. So that, of course, is easier for us. We get away with a bit more. We don't break immersion just because we didn't quite get it right, because nobody really knows exactly. So how expert is the audience really? Very. So, short story. I started at Firaxis about 3 years ago. And one of the first meetings I was in, we were working on Gods and Kings at the time. One of the first meetings I was in, the animator was showing animations for Maria Theresa. And beautiful animations. And we already had the voice actress recorded. And she had a really clean German accent. She's supposed to be Austrian. Austrians have a very different accent to a German than a German has. It's very noticeable for a German. It's not very noticeable if you're not familiar with the language. If you're American, for example, it's not that noticeable. But for me, it was like, first glance was like, this feels completely wrong. Why is she speaking German? So we actually had to go back and find another actress. We had to find somebody who spoke Austrian, had to re-record, had to get her right. And that has implications on the animation as well. If you have new voice acting, the animators will go back and have to find, again, that the face moves right, that the gestures fit with what she's saying. So going back and actually starting from scratch, kind of, was a difficult decision. But in the end, Germany is, well, for me, it was, of course, important. But also Germany for strategy games. Strategy games are quite popular in Germany. So that was a thing that was totally worth it, going back and doing that. Now, how expert is the audience? I thought about that after that incident. And, you know, it's not, I didn't study linguistics. I'm not that good at languages. I speak the languages of the countries I lived in because practice, but I'm not a linguist. So it's not education as such. It's the simple fact that I grew up in Germany. And I'm not sure if you were digging deep enough. You know, Austrians kind of sound alike to me, but Austria has different areas again. So if you actually lived in Austria, in Vienna, for example, you would probably notice like what region the actress came from that we picked. And maybe, again, if we go small enough, we didn't quite pick the right city or village. You know, it goes really down to very small increments. And I think to have a comparison, if we had taken George Washington and taken an Australian actor to do voice acting for him, every American would have been, what's going on? That doesn't fit. So that's kind of an equivalent. And of course, you know, like if you're American, Southern American sounds very different than let's say, New York or Chicago. So getting that right is difficult. And I have lived in England for 3 years, and then I've lived here in Baltimore for 3 years. And I'm very proud to say that I can start to recognize an Australian from an American and a British person from an American. But it took me quite some time. So I know how hard it is when I look at it from the other side. It's really, really tough. And I still get it wrong sometimes. I kind of can do the, like let's say you're from the deep south, I might notice that it's somewhere south of the Mason-Dixon line. That's the level of expert I've gotten at by living here for 3 years and interacting with my colleagues and Americans every day. So that's as far as I've gotten. So I'm not sure how easy it is to actually get there through education and just studying. Clearly not simply through some research, you know, in a project. Let's say you are doing civilization and you have this list of civilizations you want to do. You have a limited amount of time to complete the full project, and you start researching into the cultures, figuring out the exact way the actor needs to sound is just not very feasible. So what makes them expert is really where they were born, the culture they grew up with, the language they grew up with. And it goes beyond language as well. It goes into cultural aspects, as is pointed out here, because Germans react differently to certain cultural aspects. For example, Second World War is viewed very differently in Germany. It's a very tricky subject. So some of the jokes I've been confronted here in the US with, where people just use certain analogies, kind of in a flippant, joking way, are just really shocking the first time you hear them as a German, because you wouldn't joke about that in Germany. It's just too serious an issue still in Germany. So cultural issues do come into this and are important to get right too. So when we go, for example, to Wu Zetian, she spoke Chinese. That wasn't hard to get right. There's a lot of Chinese voice actresses we can use for that. We found somebody we really thought was a great actress. Turns out the dialect wasn't quite right. She didn't speak a Chinese that was aristocratic enough. To us, that really was not, we couldn't really hear a difference as non-Chinese speakers. But the Chinese audience, the Chinese players were very clear that really did not work. Similar for Sejong from Korea. We had him casted, and we thought he had a lot of gravitas and was actually a really good actor. Turned out the Korean audience really thought he sounded weak and not very important. And he's kind of he's a really important figure in Korea. Like, he has a really big cultural significance to them. And suddenly that voice for them portrayed not enough strength and not enough gravitas. And we were so sure because, I mean, it's a voice. But obviously, cultural influences go into this, and the value a certain person is assigned by the local audience is something that's really important, and you need to get that right. So I already answered some of this. Getting to the expert level some of our audience are at Firaxis is just really not possible. It's, we try, and to me personally, it's really important to get it right, just because I grew up getting annoyed at devs that get it wrong. But yeah, it's not really possible, at least not for all languages and cultures. We're quite good at getting America right, for example, because we have a lot of experts in the studio directly. But the further out it goes, the harder it gets. So what do? We check if anybody at Firaxis actually speaks that language or comes from that region. And by now, I have asked a lot of people at Firaxis really weird questions, like, so were you actually born here, or were you maybe, like, did you grow up somewhere else? And it can be a really uncomfortable question. But I've come to know a few people. You know, we have the wife of one of our artists is from Korea, so she can translate for us. Another wife of another artist is from China. So we have, I speak German. We have one of our UI engineers on the XCOM side is from Portugal, so we have Portuguese covered. So we're starting to build this small knowledge base of which Firaxians can give us some input on certain areas of the world and give us just a gut check. Because yes, one person is an incredible asset to have, but again, that one person comes from one region, comes from one background. You know, one country isn't just homogeneous? I'm German. So again, what I find insulting might not be what every German finds insulting. What I find weird or a weird accent might be totally normal for somebody in another region in Germany. So the level of expertise, like just resting it on one person, is again tricky because they only represent a certain crosscut of that country. They are not getting anywhere near representing the whole country. And I hope you would all agree that you would not want to be the one person, well, maybe want to, but not necessarily feel like you are the crosscut of all of your country. Next step is we have a publisher, an international publisher. We have offices. 2K has offices in Germany, in England, in South America, in like everywhere in the world, basically. So we start and check with those offices. Like my old colleagues at the Windsor office in England, we have French, Italian, Spanish native speakers there. So they are always a great resource to just go to and say like, hey, gut check, what do you think? We have offices in Asia. So especially when it comes to the Chinese and Asian languages overall, it's trickier for us even than the European languages because different alphabet, just so different in the language family that it's even harder for us. So we use those as a resource. Then actually in the voice acting session, we ask the actors to be really frank with us. It really depends. They are often used to jobs where they are asked to just give the lines and not comment, please. In our case, since it's often native speakers, at least for the leaders, we ask them to please, please comment. They are kind of an expert. So give us your thoughts and where we're going with this. If anything feels really weird to you, like that translation feels weird when you speak it, please let us know. Let's see if you can find an alternative. So it's more of a working session and not just a recording session. That was specifically important now for Beyond Earth as well, and we'll see how that works out because it isn't out yet. We'll get some feedback, I'm sure. But we try to portray this, well, civilization beyond Earth is in the future. So we're trying to portray where the Earth moved from here and where the cultures moved from here. And one of the important things in this is language. We can transport a little bit of history of Earth by messing with the languages a little bit. And so, for example, the Suzanne Fielding, the leader of ARC, she has... She speaks English, of course, because it's the American Reclamation Corporation, so she's from America. But there's some Spanish in there, because, I mean, already we see quite a bit of Spanish in the public spaces in America. So that's probably the direction we're going. It's maybe one of the more obvious ones. In other regions of the world, the background story, and Will and David will be doing a talk about that later in the afternoon, about the great mistake and the background story on Earth. For Beyond Earth. Others are a bit more tricky. So, for example, the Slavic Federation. Kozlov, the leader of the Slavic Federation, speaks a mix of Polish and Russian. He takes kind of the grammar structure from one language and the vocabulary from another. So the languages are starting to merge. And getting something like that right, the experience we had from the previous SIF parts was really invaluable. And one of the big parts was asking the voice actor. He was a guy who speaks both languages and is fluent in both languages. That was a really important part for this. So again, harder to recruit and find that actor than maybe a straightforward just Polish would be, but really valuable in terms of his knowledge then. So we had the translations. We had a script for him. Of course, we all have the script translated before we go into the session. And we had a pure Polish script, and we had a pure Russian script, and then we had a merged script. But in the session, and with the knowledge of that guy, we started fine-tuning that. And for me as a producer, that's kind of a nerve-wracking thing in some respect, because I know how hard it is to get it right. And I have no clue. I don't speak neither Polish nor Russian. So I don't really have a way of properly judging how this turns out. And but I'm really excited about being able to do this, because it tells so much of a story of what's happening or has been happening on Earth for our game. So I'm excited to see. Now we have a testing group, Frankenstein. Some of you have probably heard of that. It's a secret beta testing group we've had for years and years. And some of those members live abroad. And it's a great resource to have. These guys get early access to the game and play it and give us feedback. And they are really good at analyzing our games. But having some of them be from different areas of the world has added just a lot of has added just, that's really great to have in that early stages, because getting feedback now, for example, now, like a month from release, it's really hard to do anything about it before release. The time frames for changing these things are short. And of course, you know, a game gets announced at a certain point and there's the PR campaign, so you can't just go and ask for help from the public 2 years in advance or something. It's just not possible. So having the Frankenstein members, this testing group members, give us feedback has been really valuable. They've been very involved in Beyond Earth as well in that respect. Yeah, and then the last step, which is that we check the forums when the game goes live. And we do that anyways for, you know, just to see what's coming up, any problems, is there anything we need to fix, what exploits are the people finding. We have a really smart fan base, and they find ways to beat that game that we didn't think of, basically every time. But part of this is also checking what is the reaction from the territories where we actually have leaders. So for example, Germany, how do they respond to Bismarck in terms of when it goes about Civilization 5? For Beyond Earth, we're curious to see how people will react to Elodie, our French leader in France. What do they think? Or even in Spain and Italy, because she's from Franco-Iberia. So again, we're mixing up a few countries there and putting them together. And you can tell in her voice that it's not just French as we know it today, because it's the future. So yes, when the game goes live, we see what's happening, and depending on the reaction and like how consistent that feedback is and how impactful it is, we will go back and see if we can patch and make it just a little more fitting and find somebody who's better suited. But hopefully we got it all right and won't break immersion for anybody. That would be awesome. So, I'm already done. I told you I would be fast, Kevin. I will be around at Firaxicon, so if you have any questions, feel free to just stop me, jump out and say, hey, question about localization, and I'd be happy to answer that. Thank you a lot for coming.